Hi everyone, and thank you for your attendance at this second supervisor training for this year. I think we have a few new supervisors in attendance today, so hopefully you'll be able to figure out how to communicate. Most supervisors communicate using the chat function, but feel free to turn on your mic and ask a question if you prefer to do it that way. So let's move on. So today we're going to talk about some exam day regulations. So we'll stick with some of the more basic ones today, but it's really important that everyone understands why these regulations are so important. Of course, our main goal is fair exam conditions for all candidates. We want to make sure that every candidate gets the same opportunity to perform at their best at every exam. And that's why it's particularly important for all supervisors to really strictly follow the regulations and instructions in the instruction booklets. If you're not sure about the regulation or if you're not sure about a specific situation, first thing to do is check your instruction booklets. If there's something you're not sure of, particularly for those new supervisors that are here today, ask the office team before the exam day if some regulation is not clear. If something you don't quite understand or you don't understand why we do it a certain way, please feel free to ask. By all means, send me an email on that topic. I'm probably the best person to ask about those questions, but you can ask anyone in the office also. And if a situation occurs on the exam day, of course, ask exam support. What we're trying to achieve here is that there should be consistency amongst all supervisors, so it's important everyone understands the rules in the same way and applies the regulations in the same way. I often visit exams, as you all know, and I receive many suggestions from supervisors which are always welcome, but sometimes I also see supervisors doing things that are not regulation and are not according to the instructions in the booklets. Please don't invent new rules, please don't come up with new ideas of doing things unless you've checked with me. Some ideas are, perfectly legitimate and very good, and we can consider adopting them across the board, but other ideas you may have might not meet regulations and wouldn't be permitted. So if a Cambridge inspector turns up, they would mark us down in an inspection or give us an unsatisfactory inspection. So it's important to say that within the instruction booklets there are a lot of information. I appreciate some regulations are clearly explained and detailed, other regulations are outlined and detailed but maybe not explained. So in some cases it may not be so obvious to supervisors which rules are very strict and which are not so strict. So that's kind of the purpose of today, to sort of explain some of these regulations and why we do them in a certain way. So exam material security, this is something I comment on almost every supervisor training. This is probably the most important regulation for Cambridge. This is what they are most worried about. The regulations on this should be relatively clear for everyone, but the why is perhaps not. So I wanted to share a bit of the why today so that it's very clear why it's so important that the question of exam material security is always asked at an inspection. So Cambridge exams take place worldwide. There's around 5 million Cambridge exams over the year worldwide. The exams take place on the same day at the same time, in obviously with the exception of countries in different time zones, but certainly in Europe at the same time. So if exam content is leaked in any way, this could be very easily dispersed these days on the internet, and it may provide an unfair advantage to some candidates and potentially affect the integrity of the exam. So if, for example, exam content got out before the exam, there is the possibility that everyone taking that exam throughout Europe, for example, their results could be nullified and they might have to take the exam again. That's obviously a worst case scenario, but that's why Cambridge are so stress always the importance of exam material security. And of course, from our perspective, we absolutely do not want that situation to happen. We don't want any candidate have to retake the exam because of something we did wrong. So it's really important that exam content is always secure. It's also possible that some questions, now not whole papers, but some questions may be reused in a different format in other exams. So, for example, in the listening test, I know sometimes the CD may be the same, but the questions could be different, or a certain question in the reading may be used in a different paper somewhere. So the same exam will not happen, but some questions can be reused. So of course, this is why it's also important for this exam content to be always secure and not available. That's why all papers need to be returned after the exam. And of course, the answer sheets must not be accessible to anyone after the exam. We obviously don't want anyone tampering with it and changing the marks or the answers from candidates on the sheets. So hopefully that some of you would have known this already, but of course it's important that everyone really understands the importance of protecting the exam material. I've also put at the bottom there what is exam content: question booklets, answer sheets, rough paper for paper-based exams. In speaking, it's the speaking mark sheets and also the speaking examiner pack. So this is why we always make sure that the speaking test rooms are locked during the breaks and at lunchtime, and also why speaking examiner packs are changed twice a year, and why speaking examiners need to keep this material secure when they take it home, and they're not allowed to use it for any of their teaching, and it must remain completely secure at all times. On ID check, again, this rule should be very clear to everyone, and it should be I mean, I'm sure people realize the importance of why this is so important, but I do know that we don't always check IDs. I've mentioned this in training before. We don't always check IDs as well as I think we should do. It's really essential that we're making sure the person doing their exam is the person represented on the ID. So we can't have a case where someone is taking the exam for someone else. This is just not allowed, obviously. But if we're not checking the IDs properly, then we're not making sure that is not happening. So please make sure that the ID checks are done correctly. ID check should be, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but should be completed as per the instruction booklets. That means the written exam before each component, and for a speaking exam at the check-in and before entering the test room. And obviously check for the correct type of ID. There's a list in the instruction booklets about which IDs are accepted. Check the expiry date, make sure that the ID is valid, and check, very importantly, that the name on the table card matches the name on the ID. So sometimes I see exam staff checking the ID very quickly, and I wonder how it's possible to check that the name is spelled the same and is correctly. And of course, look very carefully at the picture and compare with the candidate. If you're not comparing the picture with the candidate, then you're not ensuring that the ID of that person is the person that should be taking the exam. So this is a really important regulation also. This happens less frequently now, but it does still happen that candidates without an ID. So we always need to ask them, do they have another valid ID with them? Offer them as many options as we can. Can they go home and get another ID before the exam starts? Can someone else bring the ID before the end of the exam? All these options need to be asked. If a candidate arrives without a valid ID, they are not permitted to take the exam. There is one exception to that, that is paper-based candidates taking a paper-based exam at age 17 and under. They can bring a valid ID to a Swiss exams office within 3 days of the exam. So this is the only exception. I think we made a clarification on this also this year as well. This only applies to candidates taking paper-based exams. Candidates aged 17 and under taking computer-based exams are not permitted to take the exam. And the reason for this is that the results turnaround is so quick that the process for processing those answer sheets can't be slowed down. And if someone does, if a candidate does arrive without an ID, please contact support just before you tell them that they cannot take the exam. We just like to do one final check, make sure you've asked all the questions, the applicable questions, to make sure we've made every effort that they can do the exam. And also this takes a bit of pressure off you, that you can say to the candidate, well, I've asked the office and they've confirmed that it's not possible for you to take the exam. So this may support you in that way. Talking about regulations wouldn't be complete without talking about electronic items. Some of the explanations I've got here I've already discussed in the first slide, which is one of the first slides, which is publishing exam content online. So this is a great risk and a great fear of Cambridge. This is very easy these days. Someone can take a quick photo of a exam paper, publish it online, and then the content is out there. I think this is less likely, if I'm honest, in Switzerland, but it's still a risk, it's still possible. I know this is a great concern in some other countries, that maybe cheating is a little bit more part of a certain country's culture. This is a real hot topic within Cambridge and will continue to be. So of course, pictures could be taken of exam content and published online. Also with listening tests or speaking tests, these could be recorded. It's quite easy with devices, and this can be shared. And of course candidates can cheat. If they're looking at any sort of exam practice material on their phone or their smartwatch, or if they've got tiny little headphones and they are listening to recordings on there, we're giving them English words. Again, it's probably unlikely in Switzerland, but we need to make sure we're checking for these sort of things. And if you notice anything, always report any malpractice or suspected malpractice related to electronic items. So fill out an instant report form and send that back to the office. Just to clarify then what should be done, mobile phone and smartwatches must go in the blue dead zone bag. The blue dead zone bag must be put on the floor beside the candidate and remain there for the entire exam, including breaks. So some key points there: must be put on the floor, not on the table. This happened at an exam recently. And it must stay on the floor for the entire exam. I think we're getting much better at being observant with this particular rule, but we do from time to time have occasions where the candidates take the blue dead zone bag and their phone out of the room at breaks. So please be I know you're giving good instructions. I've even seen it myself, supervisors giving very clear instructions, emphasizing these instructions, and then the candidate just grabs their phone and walks out of the room. So please try and avoid this. Make sure you're watching them, and please make sure they don't access their phone. In most cases they will be disqualified, so we want to avoid that. As you know, candidates have been informed that they should not bring other electronic devices such as laptops, iPads, tablets and iPods. However, I was in an exam recently and there were several of these items still there, so this is clearly still an issue. So if candidates do bring them, it's most important that you ensure that candidates do not access them for the duration of the exam. So what I'll ask you to do is not collect them, but ensure they're placed in a designated area. So for example, you can collect the candidates' bags in a certain area of the exam hall, maybe close to the supervisor desk, and you know that those electronic items in there are turned off, and make sure that the candidates don't access them at any time. It's also important to say that with all of these electronic devices, make sure that alarms are turned off. We did have one incident last year of an alarm going off during an exam. Even though the mobile phone was switched off, of course, an alarm will still go off. So make sure you're telling candidates to turn their alarms off also. It's not much fun to have to deal with that, I can assure you. Authorized items, this should be hopefully clear for everyone. These items should be at the desks, so ID, pens, pencils, erasers, pencil sharpener, one highlighter. Small pencil cases are allowed at the desks. Larger pencil cases should not be at the desks at all. I would tell candidates to put them in their bags or at the side of the room. Medicine and tissues. Water in a clear plastic bottle on the floor. And the entry statement should be on the floor after the ID check. And the entry statement should be removed after paper 1. This is still something not always happening, so make sure you're telling your candidates to take their entry statement at the end of the first paper, and if it's still there at the start of the second paper, just tell them at the start of the second paper to remove it and put it in their bag. I know candidates don't always listen to this and don't do this, but just ask them at the start of the second paper then to put it in the bag. So candidates are not permitted to have any unauthorized items at their desk. So we've just discussed the authorized items, which are these here. And then any items that are not on that list, that are therefore not permitted, need to be put in a designated area. So I know in some cases the supervisor will allocate a desk at the front of the hall or the back of the hall, or even the if we're in a very large hall, the stage, or the side of the room, an area in the side of the room where everyone can remove their second color highlighter, or the Tipex, or supervisors and invigilators can also just move those items to the side of the room or to the designated area. It's also important to check not just for these items at the beginning of the exam, but throughout the exam. I've even witnessed this myself at exams when I've been invigilating, that you check for all the authorized items and everything's okay, and then all of a sudden an extra highlighter appears or Tipex appears or something. So please make sure you and also any invigilators that are working with you on the day are checking for these items throughout the exam. Signage is also important. Outside of the room, we need directions to the exam room. These are all highlighted and detailed in more detail rather in the instruction booklets. But just to summarize them here: directions to the exam room, so candidates know where to go. The notice to candidates is in fact the most important sign you can put up. This is Cambridge regulation that requires the notice to candidates to always be outside of the room in a place visible to all candidates. The exam level can be very helpful, so candidates know they're at the right exam hall. Some venues we have exams going on the same day in different rooms. Instructions to candidates, so this means what items are allowed, the list of authorized items and unauthorized items, a silent please sign. Of course, you don't want people running around outside the room while the exam is taking place, and the switch off mobile phone. These should all be outside of the exam room. Inside of the exam room, this is actually something I've noticed recently is not always being done correctly. There's a new regulation this year for the computer-based exams that matches now the paper-based exams. It was different last year. So now all these items that I've used an example there on the right-hand side in the box, the center name, center number rather, the exam level, the component name, so that could be reading, use of English, or writing, or listening, the component start and end time, and the component duration. So previously with computer-based exams, the component duration was not required, but now it is. So it's important that this is always visible, and the PowerPoint slides for the CB exams should show this. And I think in those locations we don't have PowerPoint, which is very few, this needs to be highlighted on the whiteboard or flip chart. So just one of the last slides now is again to recap on the instruction booklets. I know I sound like a broken record now saying, please read the instruction booklets, but it really is true to say that the vast majority of information you need is in the instruction booklets. I appreciate there's a lot in there. It's not always easy to find the information straight away, but I can assure you that failing any sort of difficult or unusual situations, if your exam goes according to plan, everything that you require is in that booklet. So please make sure you know what's in them, that you read them, It contains obviously instructions to candidates, so what you're supposed to read out to candidates, how to set up the venue, where to put signs, which signs to put up. The regulations are detailed, and it also gives information on what to do in certain situations. For example, if someone doesn't turn up with an ID, a valid ID, what you should do in those situations. When I talk about instruction booklets, I also refer to the venue-specific instructions for CB and speaking exams. These are very important. These really assist you in setting up the venue correctly, properly. You know, we go and visit these venues and try and advise you how best to set them up to make sure it's consistent every time. You know, the reason I also talk about instruction booklets a lot is because many questions that we get asked on supervisor support are answered quite easily in the instruction booklet. So I'm not saying please do not ask questions to exam support, but I would really like to move towards a situation where you know the booklets better and you know all the information in them and you know how to deal with situations, and then you don't need to ask exam support. You know, exam support really is there for your support and asking you, helping you with difficult situations, but with quite regular situations, nothing out of the ordinary, you should be able to refer to your instruction booklets. So just to summarize our responsibilities, so again, those regulations I've gone through today should hopefully be not anything new to you, but perhaps the explanation of why so we do some of those things will help you appreciate the importance of these things. I cannot under-emphasize the importance of making sure these regulations are adhered to. What we're really trying to do is make sure that we're this year more consistent, that supervisors are doing things in the same way as much as possible. Obviously there's some venue specific things that are done slightly different, but certainly from a candidate experience it should be the same at every exam. So our responsibilities are key. These exams are very important for our candidates. I say this again and again, but I don't want us to forget how important these exams are to our candidates. This can have a big impact on their lives, so it's important we get things from our side of things right. We should take our responsibilities very seriously. We should always be professional and always follow the instruction booklets. Like I said in one of the first slides, please don't invent new rules without checking with me first. Don't do anything different. By all means, ask me. Supervisors ask me all the time, if I do something this way, is that okay? And I can tell you quite quickly if that's okay or not okay. We often get good ideas, and some of the changes we make in the instruction booklets are based on your feedback. You're the people that are doing the exams out there, so you know how it works, and we appreciate your feedback always, but please check with me before doing anything different. And of course, do everything possible to provide fair exam conditions for all candidates. So our goal is obviously to try and make sure that everything goes smoothly for you, that you have no technical issues, that everything works properly for you. But sometimes things do happen, and we really appreciate your efforts in trying to make sure everything goes well for the candidates. So that's it for today. I'll thank you for your time. If anyone's got any other questions, you can ask me now. Failing that, if you have any questions that pop into your mind in the next few days, by all means send me an email and I can answer those. But I hope that was helpful today. Thank you for your time. If anyone's got any questions, you can answer me now. If not, I'll wish you a good week. Thank you.